Hey guys, Mark here. Here we sit. As it stands right now, we are now into day 13, where the First Amendment and your freedom of speech really don't exist anywhere in this country. I've covered this story before, and I think a lot of people just don't get it. And I feel it's important that I keep revisiting this story until people really understand uh, the depths of the propaganda being used against the American people. Because you keep hearing about fake news and Russian propaganda and all of this stuff, right? But you gotta remember, and I'm gonna keep saying this over and over again, in 2013 they changed a law that had stood since 1948. And since that law was changed, the U.S. government has had the ability to use propaganda against the American people in the United States. This was signed in the 2013 National Defense Authorization Act. In the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act, they further broadened the powers of the Smith-Mundt Act that was altered in 2013. They now have entire groups uh, set up solely to counter uh, what they're calling Russian propaganda, which, as we know, propaganda is basically just another fancy word for point of view. So the government can now use your tax dollars to not only use propaganda against you, but they can deem anything they want Russian propaganda or something not of the narrative straight from the government. They can deem it propaganda and have it censored. Okay. Now, as we've seen, it seems like nobody at all seems interested in performing at the inauguration for Donald Trump, right? And you see video after video of Hollywood people trying to rally America to not let Trump become our next president. And it seems like a big, vast majority of them are doing this. Even with all of the evidence of criminality against Hillary Clinton, they're still doing this. Why? Well, this is it right here, guys. And y'all need to understand, this happened on February 17th, 2016. And it was just a couple of months after this happened when you started seeing Hollywood band together to try to brainwash Americans into voting for Hillary Clinton and not for Donald Trump. And as you can see right here, the U.S. Secretary of State, John Kerry, enlists Hollywood to star in propaganda fight against jihadist threat. Right? They were planning this whole propaganda thing way back in February of 2016. One attendee described the meeting between Mr. Kerry and studio chiefs as a brainstorming session where several issues were discussed, including how to counter the persuasive ISIS message. And make sure you understand, they said several issues were discussed, but they only mentioned one. Days after discussing the future of Syria with world leaders at last week's Munich Security Conference, the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has turned to another influential group to help combat ISIS, the men and women who run Hollywood. Mr. Kerry made a beeline for the heads of several major movie studios to kick around suggestions for how to disrupt ISIS' staggeringly effective propaganda machine, right? And they're talking about propaganda machine way back then, but one of the issues they're not talking about is not, they're not just talking about ISIS propaganda, they're talking about Russian propaganda. And basically what they're really talking about is American propaganda. And how do we get American propaganda to be the only narrative that really works in the United States? After the 90-minute session at Universal Studios, Mr. Carey tweeted, "Great convo with studio execs in LA. Good to hear their perspectives, an idea how to counter Daesh narrative. Daesh is an alternative term for ISIS employed by Western leaders to undermine the radical Islamist group's claim to statehood." The meeting on Tuesday was organized by Jeff Schill, the chairman of Universal, who is also the chair of the U.S. Broadcasting Board of Governors. Are y'all hearing this? The chairman of Universal is also the chair of the U.S. Broadcasting Board of Governors, of which Mr. Carey is a member. Does this not sound like a conflict of interest? That studio executives who are making our films, that are helping shape ideas in America, are parts of boards on the government? Are y'all reading this? Because that's exactly what's going on here. The BBG, the Broadcasting Board of Governors, is an independent federal agency responsible for overseeing any U.S. government-sponsored non-military overseas media output, such as the government-funded broadcasting network Voice of America, one of the outlets that might be used to counter ISIS propaganda. So as you can see here, the chairman of Universal, right? You see movies all the time start off at Universal, right? He's also the chair of the government's propaganda organization, which is an independent federal agency, which basically means, from if I'm reading this right, they virtually have no oversight. They're like rogue CIA. And, of course, while I'm doing this, I'm going to have to get an ad. So, this meeting also included studio chiefs from Warner Brothers, DreamWorks, 20th Century Fox, Disney, and Sony. And it was also attended by Chris Dodd, the former U.S. Senator from Connecticut, who is now the chairman of the Motion Picture Association of America. So you'll see that, right? You'll see that, right? Are you reading this? A former U.S. Senator is the chairman of the Motion Picture Association of America, and John Kerry is meeting with these Hollywood executives, one of who is the chief of Universal Studios, and is also chief of the government's propaganda machine. This sounds like a pretty unfortunate conflict of interest. It's kind of like Amazon. When you have like a $600 million contract with the U.S. government, and you also own a newspaper which is feeding out false news on a regular basis, that's pushing the government's narrative, you have a conflict of interest. So let's continue. Mr. Dodd and Mr. Kerry have been very close since they served together in the Senate, and Mr. Dodd reportedly joined the Secretary of State on his flight back to the U.S. from Europe, where he had been attending the Berlin Film Festival, while Mr. Kerry attended the Munich conference. Mr. Kerry was traveling to South Carolina to attend another international conference, the ASEAN Summit, hosted by Barack Obama, which gave him the opportunity to drop in on Hollywood. So, I mean, this is some dot connecting that you guys may not have done to this yet, okay? And this is important for every single American to understand. When y'all are watching the Kardashians or Kanye West or any of these people, or you're watching any of these movies, or you see all these videos about people talking about things in movies that look like things that are actually going on in the real world, you got to understand that all these executives in Hollywood are all directly tied to the U.S. government. All right? They've changed the law so they can use propaganda, and they can tell you what propaganda is, and they can make sure that the narrative going out is the one that they decide is going out. And it's gone so far to where they've actually they own Hollywood, right? These guys own Hollywood. And so if the government comes out and leans on these executives and tells them, hey, no one better come out and play for Donald Trump, because we're going to keep pushing his narrative, and we're going to make sure that America is brainwashed into believing that he's the devil. I mean, this doesn't really this you can't spell it out much better than this. This shows direct ties from Hollywood and the movies and TV shows that you watch every day to the U.S. government propaganda machine. And this shows very clearly right here in February that John Kerry was setting up to roll into motion everything we've been seeing with all this fake news coming out of all the major news networks over the past 6, 7, 8, 9 months. I don't know how else I can spell it out, but I don't see how you can see this and see how the executives of Hollywood are literally tied into agencies of the government and not be afraid. Once again, Day 13, no First Amendment. How long will these dark days in America continue? Till next time, y'all take care.